My name is Nellie, and as far back as my memory stretches, I've been the shadow in my own family. Growing up, it was always about my younger sister, Sarah. She was the golden child, the shining star, the one who could do no wrong. Sarah was everything my parents had ever wanted in a daughter. Me? I was the awkward one, the bookworm, the girl who preferred the company of numbers to people. Don't get me wrong, I loved learning, and I was good at it. But in a family that prized charm over intellect, I might as well have been invisible. I remember one day in particular. I was 14, and Sarah was 12. I'd just won a regional spelling bee, and I was bursting with excitement, eager to share the news. Mom, Dad, guess what? I ran to them, certificate clutched in my hand. I won the spelling bee. My mother barely glanced at me, her eyes already flitting back to Sarah, who was practicing gymnastics routines in the backyard. That's nice, dear, she said, distracted. Sarah, honey, be careful. You could sprain an ankle. I stood there, the certificate crumpling in my fist, as my relatives oohed and awed over Sarah's effortless back handsprings. No one asked about my achievement. No one seemed to care. My parents' favoritism wasn't exactly subtle. Sarah got new clothes. I got hand-me-downs. Sarah got gymnastics lessons. I got library cards. Sarah got praise and attention. I got used to disappointment. As we got older, nothing really changed. Sarah blossomed into a stunning teenager, popular and outgoing. I retreated further into my books and equations, finding comfort in worlds where logic and reason reigned supreme. Nellie, why can't you be more like your sister? Became a familiar refrain in our house, usually followed by, Sarah, darling, you're perfect just the way you are. I tried not to let it get to me. I told myself that one day my hard work and intelligence would pay off. One day, I'd show them all that I was worth something. When I started high school, I doubled down on my studies. I was determined to excel, to achieve something so impressive that even my parents couldn't ignore it. But I was waging a losing battle against the blinding radiance of Sarah's popularity. In my junior year, I accomplished what I thought would be my crowning achievement. I won the state math competition. It was a brutal contest, a clash of the sharpest minds in a war of numbers and logic. When they called my name as the winner, I felt a surge of pride and hope. Finally, I thought, I've done something truly remarkable. I rushed home that day, trophy in hand, eager to share the news. But when I burst through the door, it was the same old story. My parents were fussing over Sarah, who was modeling a new dress. Mom, Dad, guess what? I blurted out, breathless with excitement. I won the state math competition. My mother looked up, a distracted smile on her face. Oh, that's nice, dear. Sarah, honey, turn around. Let's see how it looks from the back. My father didn't even bother to look up from where he was adjusting Sarah's hem. Good job, Nellie. Sarah, are you sure this is the right size? It seems a bit tight around the shoulders. I stood there, trophy feeling heavy in my hand, utterly deflated. But it's the state competition. I beat hundreds of other students. That's great, sweetie, my mother said, not really listening. Sarah has a big dance recital this weekend. We need to make sure everything's perfect. And just like that, my moment of triumph was eclipsed by Sarah's latest endeavor. I retreated to my room, placing the trophy on my desk where it gathered dust, unnoticed by anyone but me. College applications loomed, and I poured my heart and soul into every essay, every form. I was determined to get into the best school possible, to prove, once and for all, that I was worth something. The day the acceptance letters arrived is etched in my memory. I'd been accepted to a prestigious university with a full scholarship to study financial analysis. My hands trembled as I read the letter, tears of joy and relief blurring the words. I found my parents in the living room, Sarah sprawled between them on the couch, flipping through a magazine. I got in, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. Full scholarship to study financial analysis at... Oh my God, Sarah shrieked, jumping up. I totally forgot. I need new point shoes for my recital next week. And just like that, the spotlight shifted. My parents sprang into action, grabbing their keys and wallets. I stood in the suddenly empty living room, acceptance letter clutched in my hand, listening to the sound of the car pulling out of the driveway. They didn't come back until late that night, arms laden with bags full of Sarah's new dance gear. My acceptance? It was never mentioned again. I threw myself into my studies at university, while Sarah's life took a different path. She enrolled in the local community college, more focused on her social life than academics. It wasn't long before she started dating Mark, her high school sweetheart. I immersed myself in the world of finance, finding a sense of purpose and validation I'd never known. For once, my intelligence and work ethic were recognized and appreciated. I made a few close friends who shared my passion for numbers and analysis. It felt like I was finally where I belonged. Meanwhile, back home, Sarah's life was unfolding exactly as our parents had envisioned. She married Mark right after graduating from community college in a lavish ceremony that my parents spared no expense for. I stood by as a bridesmaid, feeling like a stranger in my own family. Within a year of their marriage, Sarah announced she was pregnant. The day she gave birth, you'd have thought the sun rose and set on that delivery room. My parents were ecstatic. "We're grandparents," my father kept repeating, his eyes brimming with tears. "Can you believe it, Nellie? Aren't you excited to be an aunt?" I was happy for Sarah, I truly was. But I couldn't help but feel the familiar sting of being overlooked. I had just landed a job at one of the most prestigious financial firms in the city, but in the face of Sarah's motherhood, it seemed insignificant. When Sarah had her second child, a little girl named Lily, 2 years later, the cycle repeated itself. Sarah was the perfect daughter with the perfect family, and I was just Nellie, the one who worked too much, who didn't date enough, who didn't give them grandchildren to dote on. By the time I turned 30, I'd worked my way up to senior financial analyst. I was respected by my colleagues, sought after by clients, and finally experiencing a sense of self-worth that had eluded me for so long. To celebrate my success, I decided to buy a house. It was a beautiful 4-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine, bought with my own hard-earned money. The day I got the keys, I felt a surge of pride and accomplishment I'd never known before. Excitedly, I invited my family over to see my new home. I thought, finally, they'd see what I'd achieved, that they'd be proud of me. They arrived, Sarah with her kids in tow, my parents cooing over their grandchildren. As I gave them a tour of the house, my mother's main comment was, "It's such a big house for just one person, isn't it?" My heart sank. "It's an investment," I tried to explain, "and I have room for a home office now." "Well, I suppose that's sensible," my father said, but his tone implied he found it anything but. "Sarah, honey, make sure Lily doesn't touch anything. We don't want to break Aunt Nellie's things." As they left, I overheard my mother saying to Sarah, "It's a shame Nellie doesn't have a family to fill that big house, but I suppose her career is important to her." A few months after I'd settled in, I received an unexpected invitation to a family dinner. I was surprised, to say the least. My family often forgot to include me in gatherings, dismissing me as strange and uninteresting. Nevertheless, I accepted, hoping that perhaps things were changing. "Nellie, good of you to come," my father said, patting my shoulder awkwardly. "Have a seat. We have something important to discuss." A knot formed in my stomach. Important discussions in this family usually meant something good for Sarah and something disappointing for me. Still, I sat down, forcing a smile. We ate dinner, the conversation revolving around Sarah's kids and Mark's job. I tried to mention a successful project I'd just completed at work, but my words were drowned out by Lily's sudden wail for more dessert. After dinner, as we settled in the living room, my mother cleared her throat. "Nellie, dear, we've been thinking—" I braced myself, unsure of what was coming. "You're single, with no children," she continued, her tone suggesting this was some kind of terminal illness, "and you have that big house all to yourself." "Yes," I said slowly, not liking where this was going. My father jumped in. "Well, we think it would be best if you gave your house to Sarah and her family." I blinked, certain I had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "Give them the keys and move out. my mother clarified as if she was asking me to pass the salt. They need the space more than you do. I looked around the room, waiting for someone to laugh, to say it was all a joke. But all I saw were serious faces. Sarah sat there looking smug, while Mark patted her shoulder condescendingly. "You're joking, right?" I finally managed to say. "Now, Nellie," my mother said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I knew so well. "Don't be selfish. Sarah needs her own space more than you do. You're just one person after all. It's your sisterly duty," my father added, as if that settled everything. Family helps family. I felt like I was in some kind of twisted alternate reality. "But it's my house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I bought it with my own money. I worked hard for it." "Oh, come on, Nellie," Sarah chimed in, her voice sickly sweet. "You know how hard it is raising 2 kids in our small apartment. You'd be doing us such a favor." I stood up, my hands shaking. "No," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Absolutely not. I'm not giving you my house." The room erupted. My parents launched into a litany of all the sacrifices they'd supposedly made for me over the years. Sarah went on and on about the difficulties of raising children. Mark just sat there nodding along as if this whole scenario was perfectly reasonable. As I walked out, I heard my mother call after me. "Think about it, Nellie. Don't be selfish." In the days following that surreal dinner, my life became a whirlwind of unwanted attention. It seemed my parents had broadcast the tale of my selfishness far and wide among our extended family. Suddenly, relatives I hadn't spoken to in years became experts on my life, bombarding me with calls and messages. One afternoon, I picked up a call from my great-aunt Mildred, a woman I hadn't seen since I was a child. "Nellie," she clucked into the phone, "I heard about your situation. How could you be so heartless? You're nothing but an old maid saving money for no good reason." The next day, my cousin Mike, whom I barely knew, sent me a text. "Hey Nellie, heard you're being difficult. Why don't you just move to a remote island and live as a hermit? You're already an outcast and a loner anyway." 2 weeks after the disastrous family dinner, I found myself at home nursing a bad cold. As I sat on my couch wrapped in a blanket and sipping hot tea, I heard an odd noise coming from my front door. A distinct sound of someone fumbling with the lock. My heart began to race. Was someone trying to break in? I set my tea down quietly and crept towards the door, my legs shaking. Pressing my eye to the peephole, I nearly gasped out loud. There on my front porch were my sister, my parents, and Mark. Sarah was kneeling by the lock, a hairpin in her hand, while my parents kept watch. Mark stood a little way back, looking nervous. Without thinking, I yanked the door open. They all jumped back, startled expressions on their faces. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded, my voice hoarse from my cold, but filled with anger. For a moment, they all stared at me, caught red-handed. Then, to my utter disbelief, my mother spoke up. "We thought you'd be at work. We were just going to move in." "Move in?" I repeated, incredulous. "You mean break in and squat in my house?" "Now, Nellie," my father interjected. "We knew you wouldn't call the police on us. We're family, after all." I looked past them and saw a car parked in my driveway, loaded with boxes and suitcases. They had actually planned to move in behind my back. "Get off my property," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "now, or I will call the police." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, holding it up so they could see. "Last chance," I said. "Leave. Now." They stared at me for a long moment, disbelief written across their faces. Then, slowly, they began to retreat. I watched them drive away, my whole body shaking. Once they were out of sight, I closed the door, locked it, and slid down to the floor, my back against the solid wood. The very next day, I contacted a security company and had surveillance cameras installed around the perimeter of my property. These weren't just any cameras, they came with a voice recording function. But technology alone wasn't enough. I'd always wanted a dog, and now I had the perfect reason to get one. I headed to the local animal shelter, determined to find a companion who could also serve as a guardian. That's where I met Max. He was a large, mixed-breed dog with intelligent eyes and a wary demeanor. The shelter worker told me his story. He'd been abandoned by his previous owners for being too protective. I saw past his gruff exterior to the loyal, loving dog underneath. Max and I bonded quickly. At home, he was gentle and affectionate, always by my side. But when strangers approached the house, he transformed into a vigilant guardian, his deep bark a warning to anyone who might think of trespassing. I set up a comfortable kennel in the backyard for Max, complete with a cozy doghouse and plenty of toys. He seemed to love it, often lounging in the sun-dappled grass when he wasn't patrolling the perimeter. For 2 months, life was peaceful. But then a work emergency called me out of town for a weekend. I was reluctant to leave Max, but my neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, assured me she'd take good care of him. She adored Max, often bringing him treats and taking him for walks when I worked late. I left feeling relatively at ease, but on the second night of my trip, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Johnson, and she sounded frantic. "Nellie, dear, there's been an incident," she said, her voice shaking. "Max. He bit a stranger. Chased them right out of the yard and down the street. The police are here now!" I caught the first flight back, my mind whirling with possibilities. When I arrived home, I was met with a scene straight out of my nightmares. My parents' car was parked in front of my house. Sarah was there, looking both angry and smug. And to my horror, there were 2 police officers standing in my driveway. I approached cautiously. "What's going on here?" One of the officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, we've had a complaint about your dog attacking someone. Can you tell us what happened?" Before I could respond, Sarah cut in. "Her monster of a dog attacked my husband, jumped right over the fence and bit him. He could have been killed." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The bite. It had been Mark. "That's not true," I said firmly. "My dog was protecting my property from intruders. If your husband was bitten, it's because he was trying to break into my house." Sarah's face turned an ugly shade of red. "Liar! Put that beast down before it hurts someone else." My parents, who had been oddly quiet, now chimed in. "We'll be pressing charges," my father said, a gleam in his eye. "You'll have to pay for Mark's medical bills, of course." The officer looked between us, clearly sensing the family tension. "Ma'am, due to the complaint, we're going to have to take your dog to the kennel for evaluation. If he's deemed aggressive, he may have to be put down." My heart sank as I watched Animal Control load Max into their van. He looked at me with confused, sad eyes, and I felt tears welling up in my own. As the officers and Animal Control drove away, my mother approached me. In a low voice, she said, "You know, Nellie, all of this could have been avoided if you'd just given us the house. It's not too late. Give us the house, and we'll drop the charges. Otherwise, well, you know what happens to aggressive dogs." As I stood in my driveway watching my family drive away with smug satisfaction, a sudden realization hit me like a bolt of lightning: the security cameras. I rushed into the house, my heart pounding. My hands shook as I booted up my laptop and accessed the security footage from the previous night. As the video began to play, I held my breath, praying that the cameras had captured what I needed. The footage was crystal clear. I watched as Sarah and Mark crept up to my front door, looking furtively over their shoulders. Max appeared on screen, his hackles raised, a low growl emanating from his throat. Then I heard Sarah's voice, clear as day. "Mark, kick the dog when it bites you. We can accuse Nellie and demand compensation. Or better yet, we can get the whole house in exchange for the dog's life." I felt sick to my stomach as I watched Mark cruelly kick Max. The dog, surprised by the sudden attack, latched onto Mark's leg in self-defense. Sarah let out an ear-piercing scream, causing Max to release his grip immediately. The 2 of them ran away, leaving Max looking confused and distressed. The next morning, I called my parents, keeping my voice steady. "I think we need to have a serious conversation. Can you all come over to my house?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, then my mother's voice, sickly sweet. "Of course, dear. We'll be right over." An hour later, they all arrived. My parents, Sarah and Mark, his leg conspicuously bandaged. As they filed into my living room, I could see the triumph in their eyes. They thought they had won. Sarah immediately began to wander around the room, pointing at various items. "We'll need to get rid of this ugly lamp," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "And this couch simply won't do. We'll replace it with something more family-friendly." I bit my tongue, letting her continue her presumptuous tour of my home. Finally, I cleared my throat. "Before we discuss anything," I said, my voice calm despite the anger boiling inside me, "I think you should watch something." I gestured towards the large TV mounted on the wall. "Please, have a seat, all of you." Confusion flickered across their faces, but they complied, settling onto the couch. Sarah perched on the armrest, a look of irritation on her face. As the security footage played on the screen, I watched the color drain from my family's faces. Their expressions morphed from confusion to shock, and finally to horror, as they realized their scheme had been caught on camera. Sarah was the first to break the stunned silence. It was just a prank," she sputtered, her voice shrill with panic. "We didn't mean any harm." Mark nodded vigorously, wincing as the movement jostled his injured leg. "Yeah, just a joke that got out of hand. No need to make a big deal out of this, right?" My parents, however, seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. My father leaned forward, his face ashen. "Nellie, sweetheart, let's not be hasty. There's no need to make this public. We can work this out as a family." I couldn't help but smile, a cold, humorless expression that made them all flinch. "It's a bit late for that, don't you think?" I said, glancing at my watch. "And speaking of late, I believe we have some guests arriving." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to reveal 2 police officers, whom I had called earlier that morning. "Perfect timing," I said, ushering them in. "Officers, I have evidence of an attempted break-in and a malicious attempt at blackmail." What followed was a flurry of activity. I explained the situation to the police, showing them the damning security footage. They listened gravely, then moved to detain Sarah and Mark. As the officers read them their rights, my parents broke down in tears. "Nellie, please," my mother sobbed. "Don't do this. We're family." I felt a twinge of sadness, but it was quickly overshadowed by years of pent-up hurt and resentment. "You should have thought of that before you tried to steal my home and hurt my dog," I said coldly. "I think it's time for you to leave." They left in tears, following behind, as Sarah and Mark were escorted to the police cruiser. That evening, with a weight lifted off my shoulders, I went to the animal shelter to bring Max home. He was overjoyed to see me, his tail wagging furiously as he covered my face with kisses. "Let's go home, buddy," I whispered, hugging him tightly. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Sarah and Mark were arrested and stood trial. With the clear evidence from my security cameras, they were found guilty of attempted breaking and entering, as well as attempted blackmail. They were slapped with a hefty fine, which was awarded to me, and given suspended sentences. I made the decision to cut off all communication with my immediate family. However, I felt it was important that the rest of the family knew the truth. I sent a detailed account of what had transpired, along with copies of the security footage, to all our extended relatives. The response was overwhelming. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who had once berated me for my selfishness now sent messages of support and apology. My parents, Sarah and Mark, found themselves ostracized from family gatherings, their actions deemed unforgivable by even the most forgiving relatives. As for me, life took a turn for the better. I continued to excel at my job, finding more satisfaction in my work than ever before. Max and I settled into a comfortable routine, enjoying long walks in the park near our home. It was on one of these walks that I met Greg, a kind-hearted software engineer with a golden retriever named Luna. We hit it off immediately, bonding over our shared love of dogs and our similar experiences with difficult families. We exchanged numbers and began dating, our relationship blossoming with each passing day. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, and I was no longer living in the shadow of someone else's expectations. I had built my own wigwam, strong and secure, a place where I could finally be myself, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the best was yet to come. Story 2. Madeline is 8 years younger than me, and my name is Heather. My younger sister. Our parents made it obvious that she was something special from the day she was born. "Take a look at those stunning green eyes," they would say. "Or have you ever seen golden curls this flawless?" In the meantime, I watched them swoon over her while standing in the corner with my unremarkable face and plain brown hair. Don't get me wrong, I loved my sister. How could I not? She required continual care and attention because she was such a small, flawless thing. And guess who became her second mother? Both of our parents put in a lot of overtime to make ends meet. Yes, exactly. Me. "Honey, Heather, could you assist Maddie with her homework?" Mom would ask. "You're so good at math." Or, "Heather, dear, would you mind picking up your sister from school? We're both stuck at work." I remember one particular evening when I was 14 and Madeline was 6. I was helping her with her reading assignment while trying to finish my own mountain of homework. "I don't want to read anymore," Madeline whined, pushing the book away. "It's boring." "Come on, Maddie," I said, pulling the book back. "Just 3 more pages, then we can play that game you like." She pouted, but picked up the book again. "You're no fun, Heather. Sarah's big sister takes her to the park every day after school." "Well, Sarah's big sister doesn't have to work at the library after school," I replied, though it stung a bit. I was already juggling school, housework, and a part-time job at the local library to help with our family's expenses. That was our life. Madeline being Madeline and me being, well, whatever everyone wanted me to be. By 16, I was working 3 jobs at a cafe in the morning, at the library after school, and doing online data entry at night. Also, we could afford Madeline's dance classes, her private tutoring, her beautiful clothes that made her the most popular girl in school. I kept telling myself things will get better, that one day Madeline would understand and appreciate everything I'd done for her. That maybe, just maybe, our parents would look at me with the same pride they had when they talked about her. But looking back now, I understand I was just telling myself what I needed to hear to keep going. When it came time to apply for college, I knew my options were restricted, not because of my grades. Those were actually pretty excellent. Despite working 3 jobs, I had even qualified for many scholarships at out-of-state institutions. "You got admitted to Stanford?" Mom had asked when the letter arrived. Her eyes widened for a second before clouding over. "But honey, who would aid Maddie with her college prep? And you know, we can't afford that type of tuition." I remember standing there in our kitchen, clutching that acceptance letter, watching as Mom's attention moved to Madeline's latest painting piece on the fridge. I kept my offer of a half scholarship to myself. What was the purpose? So I enrolled at City College, retained my employment at the cafe and library, and continued being Madeline's personal support system during my freshman year. I'd dash from morning courses to work, then home to help Madeline with her schoolwork. On other evenings, I would stay up until 2 a.m., completing my own homework before waking up at 5 o'clock to work in the cafe. I eventually moved into my own apartment after graduating and got a respectable job at an accounting business. It was mine, a little 1-bedroom apartment with erratic plumbing. I hoped that things would be different now. I might be able to start concentrating on my own life now. The phone call regarding Madeline's graduation gown then arrived. "Sweetheart." With that typical begging tone in her voice, Mom spoke. "You are aware of your sister's importance in this. She must have the ideal appearance for her graduation." The memory of my own graduation gown, a $30 clearance rack find that was just like Jenny Thompson's, caused a sour chuckle to rise in my throat. All night long, I had been attempting to stay out of her pictures. What is her desired price for the dress? I was already grabbing my credit card when I asked. She discovered this stunning designer item, though. It's just $800. My coffee almost suffocated me. $800? That was almost a month's rent. However, I heard myself say, "All right, Mom, I'll send the money over." Then the actual bombshell was dropped. One of the most costly private universities in the state, Preston University, had admitted Madeline. Moreover, our parents had somehow managed to save a sizable sum of money for her education. "We've been putting away money since she was born," Dad remarked proudly during a family supper. "Our young daughter is entitled to the greatest education available." As I sat there with my fork frozen halfway to my lips, I thought back to all the student loans I still owed, the scholarships I had to decline, and the years I had worked many jobs to pay for my tuition at a public university. While I was saving, they had been saving for Madeline's schooling. However, it didn't end there. After Madeline began working at Preston, the requests began coming in a matter of weeks. "Heather, my dear." One evening, Mom called. "Maddie needs assistance with her flat. Pay the rent, only until she settles in." Textbooks came next, followed by a laptop, because all the other students have MacBooks. After that, she got a new iPhone because the one I had given her the previous year was humiliating. Food. Cash. Clothing. Cash. Every week, Madeline required my assistance for a new cause, a new emergency, or a new expenditure. And throughout everything, Madeline never expressed gratitude. She never once acknowledged what I was giving up for her. I was merely the family's ATM, giving her anything she needed without asking or objecting. 3 years later, I was sitting at my kitchen table reviewing my monthly budget when my phone rang. Mom sounded strangely excited. On the opposite end, "You should come over now, Heather. Maddie has some exciting news." When I got to my parents' house, Madeline was literally jumping off the walls and showing off a huge diamond ring. "I'm getting married," she let out a squeal. "I'm also graduating from college." Before I found my voice, there was a brief silence in the room. "What are you?" "Oh, Heather, don't seem so surprised." Madeline gave an eye roll. "In any case, college is dull. Jason has a lot of money, and our wedding will be the most spectacular." I felt like I was underwater during those years of labor. That much money, I just lost my money. Waiting for my parents to say something, anything at all, I stared at them. However, they simply sat there, grinning at Madeline as though she had just declared that she had cured cancer. "How about your degree?" I was able to inquire. "Everyone has made a significant investment." "Heather, I'm very sorry. What a buzzkill you are," Madeline cut in. "That's the reason you're still unmarried. You're usually so dull and realistic. For the next hour, allow me to share my wedding ideas with you." As Madeline described her ideal wedding, which would surpass the nuptials of all her friends, I sat there in a stupor. Everything had to be flawless, including the dress, the flowers, and the venue, which reportedly meant spending a lot of money. Then came the bomb. Dad cleared his throat and said, "Honey, we've taken out a loan, but it's not quite enough. And since you're part of the family, we need you to contribute." Mom done? After all, it's your sister's special day. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience when I heard myself question how much. $20,000 should cover your half, Madeline said nonchalantly, as though she were requesting a $5 loan for coffee. I don't know what possessed me to say yes. It might have been habit. Maybe it was the way Mom's eyes welled up with tears. Perhaps it was simply simpler than fighting. However, I accepted, and the next day the funds were removed from my account. They weren't finished, though. "Actually, honey," Mom remarked over our next family supper, "we've been thinking you should take out a loan to just a little one to help with the extra expenditures. For once in my life, something broke inside of me." "No," I answered firmly. "Not at all. I'm saving money for a home loan. I need to think about my future, too." "When did you start being so self-centered?" Madeline's flawless face twisted into an unpleasant frown as she demanded. My hands trembled beneath the table, but I refused to back down. "Maddie, I've handed you $20,000. My limit is that." The ensuing hush was deafening. Then Mom spoke out in that placating tone I knew so well. "The least you can do is assist with the arrangements if you are no longer willing to provide financial support." I sat back on my shoulders and nodded, already feeling the familiar weight of responsibility. But something had changed. I had refused them for the first time in my life. Even though it was a minor triumph, it felt enormous. Those weeks became a nightmare. My phone buzzed incessantly with Madeline's texts, each one demanding more money for some new critical wedding element. "I found the ideal flowers, Heather. The arrangements only cost $3,000. I need the money by tomorrow. or they'll give them to another bride. God, oh God, this band is amazing. I must have them. They played at Chelsea's wedding. They want $5,000. Is it possible for you to send the funds tonight? The venue I wanted is available, but we need to put down a deposit today. It's just $8,000. You'll handle it, right? I took a second job as a virtual assistant, working nights and weekends. My days became an endless blur of spreadsheets at my accounting job, wedding arrangements during my lunch break when I actually got to take one, and then more hours in front of the computer at night. My coworker Jenny approached me in the break room one day. "Heather, are you okay? You look different." I caught my reflection in the window and barely recognized myself. Dark circles under my eyes close, hanging loose where I'd lost weight. I couldn't recall the last time I'd had time to get my hair trimmed, so I quickly pushed it back. "I'm fine," I said automatically, "just busy with my sister's wedding." That night, I crawled into bed at 1 a.m., my eyes burning from staring at screens all day, just as I was about to drift off. My phone flared up with another message from Madeline. "Just found the most amazing ice sculpture for the reception. Only $2,500. They'll sell it to someone else if the money isn't made by morning." I buried my face in my pillow and turned off my phone, fighting back tears of exhaustion. I'd already paid for the venue, the catering, the flowers, the band. How much more could there possibly be? The answer came a week later when Mom called. "We need to have a serious family conversation, honey. Can you come over tonight?" I dragged myself to their place after work, wondering what else they could possibly want from me. I'd already depleted my savings account and maxed up my credit card. The only thing keeping me going was knowing it would all be over soon. When I walked in, I found Madeline sprawled on the couch, surrounded by travel magazines. Mom and Dad sat close, browsing through a beautiful brochure with her. "Oh, this resort is great," Madeline exclaimed, pointing to a page. "Observe the bungalows above the ocean, and they have private butlers for every suite." I stood in the doorway, watching as she flipped through the pages of what appeared to be a luxury travel brochure. When I realized what was about to happen, my stomach knotted. "What am I doing here exactly?" My voice was hardly steady as I asked. "You needed me to come over, but why?" Madeline's syrupy sweet grin, which I had come to fear, appeared as she looked up from her magazine. "Oh, we're just choosing your wedding present." I blinked. "What am I? Your wedding present?" She repeated slowly, as if I was having trouble understanding basic English. "I decided you're going to pay for our honeymoon in the Maldives." The room started whirling. I grasped the doorframe to stabilize myself. "Do you mean me? After everything that I've already paid for?" "Oh, come on, Heather," Mom chimed in. "Avoid being theatrical, dramatic." My voice broke. "I've already spent every penny I have on this wedding." "Well," Madeline shrugged, "it's not like you have anything else to spend it on." "And it's only $24,000. Something broke inside of me. 29 years of being the excellent daughter, the supporting sister, the human ATM. It all came tumbling down in that instant. Only $24,000. I just yelled. "Are you aware of the amount of work I put into your priceless wedding? Do you have any idea?" "Heather, lower your voice," Dad cautioned Mel. "I'm not going to be quiet. I'm finished. I'm utterly done with all of this." I was shaking now. Anger that has been suppressed for years is now coming to the surface. "You're nothing but a spoilt, egotistical brat, Madeline. Additionally, I'm tired of putting up with your constant demands. I need to think about my own life." An horrible grin distorted Madeline's features. "Your own life? What life?" "Heather, you're 29. An elderly maid. Have you looked in the mirror lately? Why aren't you dating? You look awful. What regular man would desire you?" Like physical strikes, the words struck. However, I refuse to back down. "I look bad because I've been working 2 jobs, 7 days a week to pay for your wedding. I haven't had a full night's sleep in months due of your incessant demands." "You're simply jealous," Madeline spit. "Jealous because I'm getting married and you'll die alone. I'm envious since you're just and I'm attractive and successful. You." That was it. The dam cracked. "Utterly successful. You dropped out of the college. I contributed to the cost. Beautiful. As ugly as they come, your soul is. You've never worked a day in your life. No matter what I've done for you, you've never expressed gratitude. You believe that everything in the world is due to you. And what do you know? I'm done being part of your entitled little world." Madeline's words trailed behind me as I turned and ran out of the door. "No one will ever marry you because you're nothing more than a jealous wet mill wonder." I heard Mom and Dad joining in behind me, hurling insults and accusations at my back. However, I didn't turn around for the first time in my life. I didn't apologize. I refused to give in. My phone was overflowing with texts by the time I arrived home that evening. Mom had written at least 30 SMS, each one more venomous than the previous. "How could you speak to your sister that way? You're nothing more than a self-centered, unappreciative daughter after everything we've done for you. How could you spoil the day for your sister?" After staring at the messages until the words were indistinguishable, I took an action I had never taken before. Something that felt both terrible and freeing. I turned on my laptop and began emailing the location. "I must withdraw my payment to the florist and cancel the reservation. Please cancel the order for the wedding arrangements to the catering company. I'm canceling the food service for the following date to the band. Regretfully, I have to cancel each reservation individually." Everything I had planned for Madeline's wedding was methodically undone. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I no longer cared that the wedding was just 2 weeks away. I felt lighter with every cancellation. Then all hell broke loose. I banned my mother's number, and my phone began to ring constantly. After I prevented her from using Dad's phone, she began using their landline instead. Email, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and every other medium sent a deluge of messages. I blocked them all. "Heather, please call your Aunt Susan. Why won't you answer? Calls from Uncle Jim? Rachel, your cousin is furious with you. How could you harm your own sister in this way?" The calls came from everywhere. Distant family members I hadn't spoken to in a long time. I hardly knew any of my family or acquaintances, even the prospective in-laws of Madeline. I completely stopped picking up my phone. Then came the in-person meetings. The yelling came from underneath my window as I was attempting to fall asleep. "Heather, now get down here." It was the shrill, irate voice of Mom. "This needs to be fixed. You self-centered witch." Madeline was that person. Hours passed while they stood there, alternating between irate demands and heartfelt entreaties. To block them out, I turned up my TV. I talked to George, the concierge for our building, the following morning. "Please don't allow them in." Silently, I said, "I don't care what they say. Here, they are not welcome." George nodded empathetically, having seen their actions the previous evening. "Don't worry, Miss Robertson. I'll see to that." My buddy Kelly phoned a week later. "Have you heard what happened?" she asked carefully. "Your parents had to take out another emergency loan to cover everything. You canceled. None of the vendors would do it on such short notice without charging premium rates. They paid nearly twice as much for everything in the end." I sat silently and allowed that to sink in. Part of me felt guilty, the part that had been programmed since childhood to take care of everything, to make everything okay for everyone else, but a stronger part of me, the part that had finally found its voice, knew I had done the right thing. A month after the drama, I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw them. Madeline's wedding photos. I hadn't meant to look, but a mutual friend had liked them, and there they were. The lavish wedding my sister had demanded had turned into something quite different. Instead of the 5-star hotel venue they'd used, our parents' backyard, the $3,000 flower arrangements had been replaced with simple grocery store bouquets. There was a laptop and speakers on a folding table, but no sign of the pricey band. Madeline was wearing her dream dress, looking as gorgeous as ever, yet something was awry in every snap. Her smile seemed forced, her eyes tight with disappointment. No honeymoon photos followed. The Maldives dream had died with the rest of her grand plans. I closed Instagram and tried to get on with my life for the first time in years. I was focused on myself, sleeping normal hours, eating appropriate meals, even starting to look like myself again. Then, 3 months after the wedding, my phone rang. It was Dad. "Heather." In some way, his voice sounded older and worn out. "We must speak. Would you be able to visit?" I agreed with him because of something in his tone. When I arrived at my parents' place, things seemed different. Mom and Dad sat on the couch looking deflated. Dad was the first to speak. Madeline's divorce is imminent. Like smoke, the words hung in the air. I waited. Jason and she. Mom's voice broke. They've been arguing since the wedding. He keeps complaining about how cheap everything was, how embarrassing it was that they couldn't even have a proper band. He's unhappy over the canceled honeymoon. The problem is, Dad went on, gazing at his hands, we took out 2 loans for that wedding. We're in pretty deep even with the scaled-down version. Heather, I knew what was coming before they said it. We were hoping Mom began. No, I said firmly and quietly. But where are your parents, Heather? And I'm your daughter, the person for whom you never saved money, the one who worked 3 jobs to put herself through college, the one who drained her savings account on a wedding that shouldn't have happened in the first place. They sat in stunned silence. We were now aware of our partial error. The way we treated you, Dad stated gently. I straightened my skirt and got to my feet. Partially wrong. You've been wrong about everything, concerning money, Madeline, and myself, about life. Maybe eventually you'll discover exactly how wrong you've been. But until then, I wish you luck with those loans. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of my parents in the rearview mirror. Standing in their doorway, looking lost and small for the first time, I didn't turn back. Life has a weird way of revealing you who people truly are. 6 months after Madeline's divorce, I was having coffee with Kelly when she hesitated, stirring her latte with unusual concentration. Have you heard of Madeline? She asked cautiously. I shook my head after the long chat with my folks. I had kept my distance and concentrated on starting over. She moved back in with your parents, Kelly continued. She is not employed. Says she's too traumatized by the divorce to maintain a job, but she's been dating a lot new guy every week. Based on what I've heard, and your parents, I interrupted. To guess, they're supporting her completely. Kelly gave a nod. Paying for everything. Her clothing, her automobile, and her evenings out. Even after those wedding loans. I wasn't surprised. Certain patterns are constant. Weeks turned into months. For the first time in years, I was able to concentrate on my primary career after quitting my second job. I started taking care of myself. I purchased clothing that wasn't exclusively for work, took a yoga class, and had regular haircuts. People started commenting on how different I looked. Then came the call I never expected. It was Mom, speaking in a tiny, strange voice. Heather, I need to tell you something. I must apologize to you. I sat down, bracing myself. Madeline. She met someone, a wealthy businessman. Mom's voice broke. She left with him yesterday. We don't know where, but before she left, she maxed out all our credit cards, every single one. The silence stretched between us. Mom, I started, but she interrupted. No, just let me continue. Your father and I are in severe debt presently. We're not calling to solicit money, though. We'll sort it out ourselves. That was something we ought to have done long ago. I simply wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. The apology was not flawless. It didn't erase years of favoritism and manipulation, but it was something. These days, I don't know where Madeline is. I occasionally come across remnants of her on social media, a location check-in there, a tagged photo here, but she's like a ghost floating from place to place, person to person. On holidays, I send quick texts to my folks. Happy Christmas. Cheers to your birthday. Happy New Year. It's superficial, but at the moment, it's all I can do. The problem with finally escaping harmful patterns, however, is this. There's always something better to fill the gaps in life. 3 months ago, I met James at a bookshop coffee shop. He was reading my favorite novel, and we started talking. In addition to being kind and successful in his own right, he sees me, which is the most important thing. Truly notices me. While organizing some old boxes last night, I came across a picture of Madeline and me when we were kids. She was 5. We were both grinning at the camera when I was 13, oblivious to what was about to happen. I thought about keeping it, but instead I put it back in the box. Some memories are better left in the past. As I write this, sitting in my favorite coffee shop with James across from me, working on his laptop and occasionally glancing up to smile at me, I realized something significant. Occasionally. Getting everything you believed you wanted isn't the key to a happy ending. Sometimes it's about finally letting go of what was holding you back all along. Story 3. My grandmother's enchantment in her small kitchen captivated me as a child. The smell of freshly made bread and pastries filled our little apartment every morning, attracting neighbors like moths to a flame. The most basic ingredients could be transformed into creations that delighted everyone who had the good fortune to taste them by her skilled and worn hands. Do you recall this, Emma? Knead dough with rhythmic precision, she would frequently repeat. There is more to good meal than just flavor. The goal is to make memories. A treasured recipe book with her handwritten notes and secrets was left behind, and her words continued to resonate with me long after she went away. Even though I was only 16 at the time, I already knew what I wanted out of life. After graduating from culinary school 10 years later, I worked in a variety of bakeries for many hours. My dream fund grew with each paycheck, bringing me one step closer to starting my own bakery. It was not an easy road. Double shifts left my feet aching, my hands raw. But I didn't falter. I saw something. I met James at that point. He entered the bakery where I worked on a rainy Tuesday morning, looking for cover from the rain. He had a disheveled appeal from his askew tie and wet suit, but his smile was the focal point of the room. Whatever has a wonderful scent. He raked a hand through his damp hair and muttered, "I'll take 2." I had just taken my famous croissants with lavender honey out of the oven. I put one on a platter and remarked, "You're in luck. The home has the first one." He chewed into it. His eyes widened with joy. "This is incredible. Tell me you're not married, please." I chuckled at his audacity. "Does it mean you're asking me out?" "Only if it's functioning." He smiled in response. Yes, it was. James was courteous, encouraging, and truly interested in my dreams, unlike anybody I've ever encountered. Unlike others, he didn't think my ideas to start my own bakery were unrealistic when I told him about them. Rather, he provided encouragement and insightful questions. Our romance took off right away. After 6 months, we were talking about getting married. Everything changed when I got to meet his family. James's mother, Patricia Chen, embodied high culture and old money. I felt out of place right first because of her well-manicured hair, fine clothes, and arrogance. She used her position as the property manager of one of the most prominent shopping malls in the city, Crystal Mall, as a weapon. So she began. Drinking her wine at our first supper together. "Did you work as a baker?" "Yes," I responded quickly, trying not to be alarmed by her. "I've been putting money down to start my own bakery." The harsh sound of her laughter pierced the room. "Oh, sweetheart, what percentage of small businesses fail within the first year, particularly right now?" "James, you must be able to assist her in locating something more practical." "Squeeze my hand beneath the table, James. Emma is so skilled, Mom. She is skilled at what she does." "She does, of course," Patricia answered with a condescending smile. "However, wouldn't it be preferable to have a wife who is able to go to board meetings and charity events? Someone who is compatible with our world." I didn't answer, but her words hurt. Robert, James's father, swiftly shifted the topic, which I later found out was his go-to strategy for avoiding conflict. 6 months later, James and I were married in a modest ceremony, in spite of Patricia's contempt. Patricia was disappointed at every opportunity, since it was not the lavish event she had imagined. I was secretly pursuing my ambition of opening a bakery when I had a fortuitous encounter with well-known real estate developer Marcus Sterling. "Modify everything. I'm impressed. Amazing. My vision and business plan." Marcus offered to invest in my bakery, giving me the money to start a high-end bakery and cafe idea, with space for expansion rather than simply a modest shop. Patricia worked at the Marcus and Crystal Mall, which neither James nor Patricia were aware of. She threw out my application for a spot as soon as it came over her desk. "Here's a bakery," she sneered. "This is not a roadside kiosk. This is a posh mall." She was unaware that Marcus had already given his approval for my tenancy. Her denial was a trivial formality. Construction of Sweet Heritage, located in the center of Crystal Mall, started 2 weeks later. When Patricia learned that her veto had been overridden, Her rage was evident. She could do nothing, though. The night before the official opening, she paused at the look of smugness and contempt on her face. "Don't expect James to pick up the pieces when this fails, and it will fail," she added. Her voice was icy. With a grin, I suppressed the truth. "Patricia, I appreciate your concern. Would you want some coffee? The machines are being tested." Sweet Heritage welcomed a throng of excited patrons when it opened its doors the following morning. The sophisticated decor demonstrated the ideal fusion of history and contemporary, and the air was filled with the aroma of freshly baked pastries. We sold out before midday, and we started receiving great accolades from culinary reviewers. The bakery's success was greater than Patricia's displeasure, but I couldn't help but feel a little triumph when she hurried off that morning without telling Marcus about it. It wasn't only about disproving her. I wanted to prove myself correct. My grandmother's battered recipe book was in my apron pocket as I stood in my dream. I knew this was only the beginning. At the monthly tenant meeting of the mall, the situation escalated. Patricia had planned it for our peak morning hours, so I had to decide whether to attend or supervise the breakfast rush. I went to the meeting and, grudgingly, assigned Sarah to run the store, Patricia was saying as I slipped into a seat. "As you can see from these charts, there are now issues with foot traffic in the North Wing, certain establishments." She hesitated, her gaze latching on May air, generating congestion that frustrates our more established tenants. The boutique on our next door spoke out quickly. "In fact, we've seen a 30% increase in sales since Sweet Heritage began. While they wait for their orders, their customers shop." Through the room, there was a ripple of agreement. Patricia's expression became tense. "Well," she gave it another go. "There have been concerns concerning smells. Do you mean the aroma of freshly baked bread?" Someone laughed and broke the silence. "It's amazing. It makes the entire mall feel cozier, according to my consumers." "What about Patricia?" Marcus, who is calm, interrupted her from the back with a firm voice. The proprietor of the mall had been watching in silence. "We've heard enough, I believe. Mall traffic has increased, and Sweet Heritage has surpassed expectations. Maybe we ought to concentrate on more urgent issues." Patricia's lips were pushed when she sat down suddenly. She cornered me in the corridor following the meeting. She screamed, "I don't know how you fooled everyone, but this won't last. You're not worthy of my son or this mall." "Mom?" She was surprised by James's voice. He had come to have lunch with me. Patricia softened instantly. "James, sweetheart, I was simply worried about how much stress Emma must be under managing a company like this. You must want her to spend more time with her family. Your constant interference is the only source of stress I experience," I answered calmly. "You dare?" Patricia snapped. "My son's pleasure is all that's on my mind." "No," James interrupted in a caustic tone. "You're considering yourself. Emma has created something amazing. Why are you unable to just assist her?" Well-timed tears sparkled in Patricia's eyes. "You've turned against me, I see. A mother and her son are strained by what sort of woman? The sort who's altering your entire mall," Marcus replied as he walked over to Patricia. "Now my office." We saw them leave. James gave a headshake. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she was being that terrible." "You're not to blame," I said, although I kind of wanted he had noticed sooner. Before I could continue, Sarah hurried up, panting. "The review by Emma, the food critic, is now available. The review exceeded our expectations. Tremendous acclaim for our creative dishes, excellent service and a friendly environment." By the evening, we had more clients than ever before, including several well-known food bloggers. Patricia didn't show up at the mall for several days. Gossip suggested to extended meetings with Marcus. I remained silent, awaiting the appropriate time. It happened at a family supper on Sunday night. Patricia insisted on hosting so that certain alterations could be discussed. "Cryptic," she remarked. It was a stressful lunch. As Robert engaged in awkward small talk, Patricia picked at her food. She cleared her throat at last. She started by saying, "There have been developments at work." James scowled. "What's happening?" She spoke in a tense voice. "Mr. Sterling is making organizational changes. A new property manager with new ideas is being brought in by him." "What?" James cried out. Patricia said sourly, but it seems like you've been managing Crystal Mall for years. Someone has convinced them differently. Someone will recognize the possibility of something greater, I said quietly. Allies looked at me. What are you saying? Robert inquired. I opened Sweet Heritage after taking a deep breath to regain my composure. Marcus and I met during a lecture. He saw potential in my ideas, not just for a bakery, but for modernizing retail spaces. Patricia laughed sharply. You have big ideas and are a baker. I passed a folder over the table and responded, yes. These are proposals I've worked on with Marcus for over a year. Suggestions for making Crystal Mall a contemporary attraction. James's eyes widened as he opened the folder. Public areas and festivals throughout the year. Amma, this is incredible. Absurd. Patricia sneered. Marcus would never. I've done so already. As Marcus entered the room, Patricia's face was devoid of color. Well, I didn't, Mr. Sterling. Marcus said that Emma controls 51% of the mall segment of Sterling Retail Properties, which includes Crystal Mall. The room exploded. Patricia looked astonished. Robert's drink suffocated him. It isn't feasible. Patricia sputtered. In just 1 year, Emma has increased income by 40%. Marcus said that her tactics are changing the retail industry. Patricia said, Are you taking over? No, I answered firmly. For our expansion, you have been elevated to the position of Regional Operations Director. I also said that I'm assuming we can collaborate professionally. Patricia's astonishment gradually gave way to reluctant acceptance. I could have miscalculated you. You certainly did, I said. So, what are you going to do now? Squeeze my hand as we walked away, James. I ought to have defended you earlier. Yes, I said with a smile. But what happens afterward is what counts. A silent contemplation descended upon me as we drove home. Patricia had been humbled, but I still had unanswered questions. Would her sudden acceptance of me last past the effects of the situation? What would that imply exactly? Because it had been prompted not by real change but by necessity? The following day brought further difficulties. My everyday contacts were changed as word spread about the management changes in the mall. A few workers gave me respectful greetings. Others sent out tense looks that suggested they were afraid of what lay next. Yet beneath the surface, there was a burgeoning energy, the buzz of something fresh and promising taking shape. When Patricia returned, she had taken a week to come to terms with the turmoil. The enthusiasm for the new projects was unexpected. However, it appeared that she was more driven to prove herself to Marcus than to embrace the goal. It was progress, though. She made an appearance at Sweet Heritage before daybreak 3 weeks later. Uncertainty softened her normally perfect stance, and her high-end purse appeared more like a protective barrier than a fashion item. We just need to talk, she said. Despite being wrist-deep in commando, I pointed to my office. 5 minutes. She waited, calmly observing while I finished the delicate laminating procedure. By the time we sat across from each other, the tension had deepened. Her gaze strayed across my office's shelves, stopping briefly on my grandmother's cookbook. I am able to. She started by going over the plans for expansion before measuring the successes. The demographic data for the suburban locations is impressive. I gave a nod. Thank you. I waited for her to speak what she had truly come to say, so I said nothing. The pearls around her neck caused her fingers to worry. She spoke at last, her voice faltering. I must apologize to you. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to listen to her. When James presented you to us, I was biased. I thought the person I saw wasn't mine. I believed it might hinder my son's progress. I was completely mistaken. I was surprised by her openness, but I just asked. And now? Now I see someone with vision and character, someone who picked Grace over me and used every chance to get revenge. You've created something truly remarkable, and I was totally wrong about you. I crossed my arms and reclined in my chair. And why did you decide against it? She answered quietly. You did. Your behavior, your fortitude, and this location. Isn't it more than just a bakery? It is a dynamic illustration of what retail may develop into. That's the plan, I said. Transactions are no longer the only aspect of retail. Building relationships and experiences through storytelling is the goal. Her gaze strayed to the recipe book again. Almost myself, she replied, referring to the morning buns. Indeed, they make me think of the ones my grandmother made. Years ago, I misplaced her recipe. I took the book from the shelf and stood there. Do you want to witness the manufacturing process? Her gaze expanded. Tears are forming at the edges. You'd share that with me? Recipes from the family are meant to be shared. We have to start there if we want to make this work, I said. Patricia Chan wore an apron for the first time at the Sweet Heritage kitchen that morning. Her first morning bun efforts were far from flawless. Uneven filling, asymmetrical forms. However, her smile was real and unguarded as she bit into her first creation. Patricia's early morning baking activities became a familiar sight during the ensuing weeks. After being stunned at first, the renters started to accept the concept. Slowly but surely, our personal connection blossomed alongside our professional one. A few months later, during the second Sweet Heritage location's grand opening, Patricia was showing her pals from the country club how to make croissants. Marcus, who was observing a scene, smiled and nudged me. Never imagined I'd see the day. Honestly, I said, neither did I. Within a year, 5 other locations opened as a result of the successful expansion. Each one embraced Patricia's operational experience while capturing the essence of the original sweet tradition. Food bloggers began to speculate endlessly about the morning buns, which are now a signature item. Patricia stayed after we closed the flagship shop one evening. Emma, I've been thinking about your community idea, she added. Oh, what if we extended it? Classes in cooking? Maybe teaching people how to create their own scamming traditions? I grinned. That is a great concept, in my opinion. Her hub was unexpected, but warm. Thank you, she said in a whisper, for continuing to believe in me. I thought about life's greatest victories, which are frequently mine, and the relationships we create as I drove home. It took more than just establishing a successful company or disproving others to achieve success. Honoring my grandmother's legacy and fostering growth in others, even those who resisted, were the main goals. When I got to Sweet Heritage the following morning, Patricia was already there. I was thinking, she added, her apron coated with flour. Perhaps we could make something that tells your story, or a special pastry for James and your anniversary. Our tale? I made a little correction. The sweet and the bitter. She grinned in comprehension. Yes, everything. The aroma of new possibilities permeated the air as we worked side by side in the warm glow of the morning sun. It was more than simply a fresh start for the mall or the bakery. It was a fresh start for all of us. Story 4. Ethan's eyes were flaming with anger, and his hands were clenched as I froze. Nancy, do you believe you can respond to me? Before I could respond, he snarled. With his face contorted in rage, he sprang at me and slammed both fists into my stomach, causing my already fractured body to tremble with anguish. Helpless and confined to the hospital bed, I held my sides as I gasped for air. The sound of footfall hurried approached the door, and I could taste the metallic tang of panic. Would this nightmare ever be over, or would I lose everything at this particular moment? Nancy is my name. I am a 43-year-old homemaker with a kid named Lily, who is 7 years old. My life might appear picture-perfect from the outside. I'm married to Ethan, who once assured me that we would be happy and in love for the rest of our lives. However, looks may be misleading. Ethan was everything I believed I wanted when we first met. Charming, focused, and self-assured. He simply swept me off my feet. We met at a dinner party hosted by mutual friends, and I sensed a spark I had never experienced before as soon as our eyes met. Ethan seemed ideal, always having the appropriate words to say, the appropriate motions to use. In less than a year, I was planning a future I thought would be lovely, and wearing his ring. I quit my studies job at an accounting company to live the conventional life Ethan had dreamed of, one in which I would support his profession while concentrating on my family. It seemed like the proper choice at first. Ethan lavished me with love by organizing romantic nights and surprised me with flowers. Every sacrifice seemed valuable because of his assurances of a promising future. However, Ethan's attitude altered when the honeymoon period was over. The man who used to love me became cold and aloof. His kind gestures disappeared completely, and compliments became complaints. He began pointing out everything I hadn't done to his satisfaction, rather than asking how my day had gone. He now expected the immaculate house and the freshly prepared meals I used to love making, and anything less was frowned upon. Ethan would completely ignore me whenever I attempted to communicate how I felt. "Nancy, you're a housewife." With a smug smile, he would say, "Your life isn't very difficult." Even though his remarks were hurtful, I forced myself to ignore them, because I had to be strong for Lily. Even though I had to put up with Ethan's increasing lack of interest in order to give my kid a secure environment, she earned it. As the years passed, I came to the realization that the man I had fell for was no longer there. Ethan was no longer known. What I had thought was a dream had gradually become a nightmare because of someone who no longer regarded me as a partner, but rather as someone to control and critique. However, I held on to the optimism that things would change in the future. I had to deal with Ethan's criticism all the time. No matter how hard I worked to keep the home clean or make sure dinner was ready when he arrived, there was always a black cloud hanging over everything. It was never sufficient. There was always something for him to gripe about. He would place his luggage on the kitchen table and say, "You missed a spot on the counter." "Why doesn't Lily feel ready to go to bed? What exactly do you do during the day?" His remarks eroded my confidence gradually, like little knives. I initially attempted to argue with him by describing the amount of work I put into handling things, but my arguments were consistently ignored. "Nancy, you're simply making excuses," he would respond. "Taking care of this house and our family is your only task. Why is that so difficult?" It was made worse by Ethan's numerous work transfers. He blamed everyone but himself every time he returned home with news of getting fired or resigning. His teammates were inept, and his supervisors were unjust. Nevertheless, he was able to use these setbacks as justifications for why I was the one who let him down. "It's your job to make my life easy." Instead, he would respond, "You're simply another issue that I have to handle." I did everything I could to ensure Lily had a happy and secure upbringing, but I sometimes felt like I was raising two kids, Lily and Ethan. It was always difficult because of Ethan's erratic mood swings. For small infractions like leaving toys on the floor or talking too loudly, he would chastise her. I had to intervene in an attempt to protect her from his cruelty. "Don't treat her that way." If I were to say it strongly, he would turn his ire on me. "Perhaps I wouldn't have to if you taught her some self-control," he would lash out. As the years went by, I gave up on arguing. I knew that it would only get worse, and it was draining. Instead, even as my own soul drained, I concentrated on Lily and gave everything I could to provide her with a sense of security and love. Ethan, however, seems to like being in charge. I hardly recognized the guy I had previously adored, a man whose words and deeds made me feel little and unimportant. Nevertheless, I stayed for Lily, in the hopes that things would improve in the future, I told myself. I had just done my grocery shopping on a normal Tuesday night. My thoughts were focused on the several chores that awaited me at home, including cooking supper, reviewing Lily's assignments, and cleaning the kitchen. I never noticed the car approaching as I was carrying my things across the street. The last sounds I heard before everything went dark were the screaming of the horn and the squeal of tires. My body hurt, and I was immobile in a hospital bed when I woke up. My ribs hurt every time I breathed, and both of my legs were in casts. Beside me, a nurse said that I had been struck by a car that was moving too fast. It would take months for me to recuperate from my terrible injuries. I felt very powerless during those initial days, tasks that I had assumed were normal. Taking a seat, eating. Without help, even reaching for a drink of water was impossible. My lifeline was my parents, Eleanor and Richard, who came to see me every day and looked after Lily while I was in the hospital. They attempted to cheer me up with their unwavering support, gave me meals, and informed me that Lily was doing well. However, Ethan was not present. I had anticipated that as soon as he learned of the accident, he would come to my aid. There was only stillness instead. Weeks passed and he still hadn't arrived. I thought he would be there every time the door to my hospital room opened, but he was never there. It was not until the third week that Ethan appeared. His face was not one of shame or worry as he entered the room. It was irritation. His arms crossed, he stood at the foot of my bed and spoke for the first time since the accident. "How much of a burden you've become is beyond you." His comment struck me more forcefully than the vehicle that had put me in this bed. Shattered, I gazed at him, attempting to comprehend the brutality of his words. How could he hold me responsible? How could someone treat me this way after I gave them so much? "What are you saying?" The antiseptic hospital room reverberated with Ethan's scathing remarks. "How much of a burden you've become is beyond you," he spoke again in a contemptuous, icy tone. I stared at him in shock as I fought to sit up my fractured body, objecting to every little motion. "Ethan, I didn't ask for this." With a quivering voice, I spoke. "Being struck by a vehicle was not my choice." He snorted and stepped forward, looming over me like a magistrate giving a verdict. "Do you believe that has an impact? You are doing nothing except laying here, and I'm expected to take care of everything now." "Nancy, I can't afford this. You have to solve it." His words sliced through me, causing tears to spring up in my eyes. "Work things out." "Ethan, I can't even walk. What are you expecting me to accomplish?" Ethan's face became stern. "Get rid of your jewelry," he said. "This mess is more than you can handle. I won't waste any more money on you." I froze, briefly silenced by the shock of his wickedness. "Are you serious?" I muttered. "This is how you treat me after all that I have done for you. Ethan, you're my spouse. You're meant to stand with me, help you." His voice rose as he barked. "Nancy, you're worthless now. This family must be carried by me. Furthermore, you are no longer able to fulfill your role." As his rage bubbled over, the room's air seemed oppressive and thick. I could no longer remain silent. "Ethan, all I've done is help you. While you were working at several jobs, I maintained our house, nurtured our kid, and sacrificed my career for you. And right now, when I most need you, I'm useless, you say." Anger distorted his face. "Do you believe you can respond to me?" He slammed his hands into the bed's edge and yelled, "You have no right to demand anything." I winced, but he sprang forward before I could react. He clenched his fists and used both hands to strike me in the stomach. My already fractured body was in excruciating pain, and I was struggling to breathe. As I attempted to comprehend what had just transpired, the room whirled. "Who are you?" My body ached from Ethan's onslaught, and before I could completely comprehend what had occurred, I was gasping and gripping my stomach. My hospital room's door flew open. With a mix of astonishment and resolve, a security guard and a nurse rushed in their faces. "What's happening?" The nurse intervened between Ethan and me and made a demand. I was provoked by her. With his hand still clenched, Ethan gave a defensive yell. My life is being ruined by her. The security officer acted without hesitation. "Now stand back, sir." Taking Ethan by the arm, he gave the instruction. Despite Ethan's resistance, the guard tightened his hold. "You must go now." Ethan gave me a final look. His face was white with rage. "Nancy, you'll regret this." He gave a hiss. "It's not over yet." I was both relieved and afraid as the soldier led him away. My entire body hurt. Even though my heart was broken, I knew for the first time that I couldn't keep quiet any longer. Ethan's brutality had escalated beyond redemption. Leaning over me, the nurse examined my wounds. "Are you all right?" Gently, she inquired. Her voice became worried. I gave a feeble nod, tears running down my cheeks. I said, "Please just keep him away from me." Those were some of the most difficult days of my life. Richard and Eleanor, my parents, took full responsibility and made sure I was never left alone. From taking care of Lily to discussing with hospital officials the possibility of submitting a formal report against Ethan, they took care of everything. Their steadfast assistance served as my bulwark against the storm. I was recuperating physically. However, the emotional wounds were more profound. I always see Ethan towering over me with his hands up in anger when I close my eyes. I was unable to shake the nightmare-like recollection of his onslaught. Even much it hurt. I felt I had to do something. For Lily, as well as for myself. I started talking to Amanda, a lawyer, who promised that Ethan would be held responsible for his deeds. "You've had enough," she stated firmly, referring to Nancy. "It's time to defend yourself." A glimmer of optimism appeared in me for the first time in years. I was no longer merely getting by. I was getting ready to take charge of my own life. Fighting back was a difficult but essential decision. What I already knew had been confirmed by Ethan's furious outburst in the ICU. For the sake of both Lily and myself, I couldn't allow him to continue to dominate or hurt me. With my parents' help, I had to make sure he was held accountable for his deeds. I started assembling the materials I would need for my case. During our first encounter, Amanda, my lawyer, rapidly became my best ally. She was a brilliant and determined lady. She listened carefully as I described the physical assault in the hospital and the years of mental torture Ethan had endured. "Nancy, you have a compelling argument." Amanda showed me the medical documents that detailed her injuries, as well as the testimonials of the hospital personnel. "We can unequivocally demonstrate what he did." I felt like I had a new purpose after hearing those words. Amanda and I collaborated to gather proof, which included the nurse's comments and pictures of my injuries that were taken right away following the occurrence. Additionally, my parents assisted in gathering evidence of Ethan's financial recklessness and negligence. Every bit of evidence pointed to a man who had been pulling me down for years. Even though the legal process was difficult, I didn't give up. However, Ethan left voicemails that alternated between barely veiled threats and hollow apologies in an attempt to frighten me from the sidelines. In one, he remarked, "You're wrecking my life. You're mistaken if you believe you can win." I didn't answer any of his phone calls. Amanda suggested that I be quiet and let the facts do the talking. "Don't reward him with a response," she said. I poured myself into my recuperation as the court date drew near. Even though physical treatment was painful, every little win was worth it. When I took my first step and stood up, I was reminded of my strength. My parents' constant support and Lily's sparkling laughter kept me going. I wasn't merely getting ready for a court case, even on the most difficult days. I was taking back my life. Ethan had deprived me of my self-assurance and autonomy for years. I was now resolved to prove to him and to myself that I was more powerful than he had ever thought. On the day of the hearing, I had a mixture of anxiety and resolve. Amanda was at my side as I entered the courtroom, wearing a straightforward but assured dress. With their comforting smiles and unwavering support, my parents were seated in the gallery. Too young Lily, to comprehend the circumstances, remained at home with a reliable nanny. At the defense table, Ethan was already seated. His formerly assured manner gave way to obvious discomfort. His eyes kept straying toward me, while his lawyer murmured, barely in his ear. The man who had consistently attempted to control me suddenly appeared to be a shell of his former self. Amanda gave a concise and accurate account of Ethan's conduct to start the case. Beginning with the hospital attack, the security guard and nurse described in their testimony how they stepped in to stop Ethan's violent outburst. They made powerful speeches that vividly described the incident. Amanda then showed the medical documents, which detailed the extra bruises brought on by Ethan's fists in addition to the injuries sustained in the collision. I could feel the weight of the evidence settling in the courtroom as pictures of my injuries were shown. Ethan's attorney made an effort to minimize the situation by claiming that Ethan had previously apologized and characterizing it as a frustrated moment. However, Amanda refused to accept it. She meticulously deconstructed all of the justifications, highlighting Ethan's past emotional abuse and neglect. "This goes beyond a single incident," Amanda stated firmly. "Years of brutality, deceit, and bloodshed have culminated in this. Nancy deserves justice since she has suffered enough." Ethan made feeble and unpersuasive attempts to transfer blame when he entered the stand. "She's overstating," he stumbled. "She's attempting to destroy me, even though I've done everything for this family." Amanda was tough in her cross-examination. Ethan was clearly upset when she made him acknowledge his shortcomings as a spouse and father. When she was done, his barriers had completely fallen apart. The court handed down the decision following hours of hearing and discussion. Ethan was convicted of domestic abuse and assault. In addition to receiving an 18-month prison sentence, he was also required to pay hefty fines, which included covering my medical bills. I felt a weight come off my shoulders as the gavel struck. When the courtroom gavel struck, indicating Ethan's conviction, justice had been done, I experienced a sense of relief. At last, justice had been done. My folks were with me when I exited the courthouse. Their comforting presence served as a continual reminder that I was no longer fighting this battle alone. I felt liberated for the first time in years. Liberty to create a life in which Lily and I might prosper fearlessly. I was able to find a comfortable apartment in a peaceful neighborhood within weeks after the ruling. Although it wasn't big, it had everything I needed to start over for us. Every item of decor and furnishings seemed like a representation of a life that had been taken back. I felt like I had a new purpose once we moved into our new house, and the sound of Lily's laughing filled the halls with optimism. Resolute to support her and ensure our future, I made the decision to try something different. I had an idea one evening as Lily and I were sitting there watching movies on the internet. How about if I told my story? Not only the difficulties, but the fortitude required to go over them? I started a YouTube channel with my parents' help. I began by sharing films of my experience overcoming an abusive marriage, pursuing justice, and starting again. In addition to sharing my story, I wanted to give hope to anyone who might be facing comparable difficulties. I discussed self-care, resiliency, and appreciating little accomplishments. I was surprised to see how quickly people started to relate to my work. My channel expanded quickly in only a few months. In their emotional remarks, viewers thanked me for inspiring them and shared their own memories. Companies contacted me to collaborate, and the revenue one began bringing in for my channel much above my initial projections. I felt financially independent for the first time in years. The channel's popularity enabled me to follow long-buried goals in addition to securing Lily's future. I started putting money aside for her schooling and organizing enjoyable outings for us, making memories I hoped she would always treasure. Every night, while Lily and I prepared supper or watched her favorite shows on the couch, our tiny apartment turned into a place of happiness and laughter. I was very appreciative of the life we had restored. The woman Ethan had attempted to shatter was no longer me. I was happier, smarter, and stronger. And I felt we had a bright future together with Lily at my side. I sincerely appreciate your support and interest in my channel. Remember to like this video if you found the narrative inspiring and enjoyable. Your encouragement inspires me to tell more tales like this. Leave a comment below. I would love to engage with you and hear your ideas. Have you or someone you know had difficulties similar to these? Let's have a discussion. Join my channel by subscribing. Don't pass up more inspirational tales, life lessons, and strategies for overcoming adversity. To receive updates on every new video, click the bell button. I am very grateful for your support. We can create a strong, hopeful, and upbeat community if we work together. I appreciate you joining me on this adventure. I'll see you in the upcoming video. Story 5. I always knew I was second best as a child. I'm the younger daughter, and my name is Isabella, although everyone calls me Bella. And what did your normal middle-class family look like? The golden kid was my sister, Catherine Katie, who was 3 years my senior. She had the good fortune to have naturally blonde hair that appeared to capture the sun perfectly in every picture. Mom never missed a chance to photograph her ideal angel for social media or the family album. I was anything from unattractive. My aunt described me as having an intriguing face, hazel eyes, and my own type of lovely black hair. However, fascinating wasn't enough in our home. I was recently there, and Katie was the norm. The partiality was overt. When I needed something, we would spend whole weekends at the mall while Katie got new outfits. See you next month, my love. Because she needed more area to study, Katie was given the larger bedroom. On her 16th birthday, she received an automobile. I purchased a watch for myself, not even a very pleasant one. The real kicker was when we each graduated from high school. Our parents hosted a huge celebration for Katie's graduation. Dad said with pride that they will cover the cost of her college education. She intended to pursue a career as a bank manager. Everyone joined him in toasting to her promising future. I graduated 3 years later with grades that were even higher than Katie's. I can vividly picture myself seated at our kitchen table. In front of me, as I watched my parents exchange awkward looks, were college acceptance letters. Sweetheart, Mom began to look away from me. We just do not now have the funds for college. Due to Katie's tuition and the challenging market, Dad got in. Perhaps you might save up some cash by working for a year or two. I was struck into silence as I sat there. The same parents who had recently purchased a new laptop for Katie's college studies were claiming they were unable to pay for my education. I sobbed myself to sleep that night, but I would never again weep for their partiality. I began looking for a job the next morning. In less than a month, I was hired as a maid at our city's most upscale hotel, the Grand Plaza. I moved into a modest studio apartment across town, while Katie, after graduating from college, went back home to save money, she claimed. Although it was difficult at first, living alone is preferable to remaining at home and seeing Katie enjoy our parents' unending attention. Even though my flat was simple, it was mine. Knowing that I was surviving on my own gave me a sense of satisfaction every night when I arrived home from work, fatigued. While some of the other maids at the Grand Plaza Hotel grumbled about the demanding visitors and the never-ending rooms to clean, I immersed myself into my work. I viewed every assignment as a chance to get first-hand knowledge of the hotel industry. The only person who routinely receives flawless room inspection results is you, Bella. After just 3 months, the head housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, informed me. How is it done? I just made an effort to consider what I would want if I were staying here. I straightened my uniform and answered. I was promoted to head maid within 6 months. I initially met him at that time. The visitor in room 742 is James Richardson. He was likely in his mid-40s, well-dressed, with fine clothes and salt and pepper hair. One morning, when I was overseeing the cleanup of the mess on the 7th level, I observed him observing me. He yelled, "Is it possible to speak?" A brief inquiry about additional towels evolved into a 15-minute discussion on hotel management. He happened to run into me again the next day, as well as the subsequent one. On his 5th day at the hotel, he casually offered that he join me for dinner tonight. There's a great restaurant downtown that I know of. I stood with my shoulders straight and met his gaze. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Richardson. However, I must clarify, if you want a short-term somewhere to stay while you're there, I have no interest in it. Rather than take offense, he laughed. All right. However, my invitation is still valid. Only dinner, not much more. I strongly but courteously rejected. For the rest of his 3-week visit, he remained cordial yet courteous. He left me a business card with his number on the day he checked out. I put it away, assuming that was the end of it. After 2 weeks, things began to change. First, I received an opportunity to work at the front desk after being summoned to the hotel manager's office. A big promotion. I was promoted to leader of the registration team before I had a chance to adjust to my new position. I was promoted to assistant manager of the front office a few weeks later. After Mr. Richardson left, I was promoted to manager of the entire front office within 2 months. Even though I knew I was skilled at my career, the speed at which I was progressing made my head spin. It nearly felt too fantastic to be true. Shortly after, the murmurs began. She's probably having an affair with Mr. Blackwood. I heard one of the receptionists mention our motel owner to another. Did you notice how quickly she rose? You know, no one gets promoted so fast without. I made an effort to disregard the rumors, but they are now public. I had put a lot of effort into every marketing, stayed up late, and became well-versed in every facet of the business. People, however, believed that I had slept my way to the top. Actually, I didn't even really get to meet Mr. Blackwood, much less have an affair with him. Mr. Blackwood's secretary called to arrange a meeting one Monday morning. I felt sick to my stomach. Usually these unplanned encounters were a sign of trouble. At exactly 2 p.m., I knocked on the door of his office. "Enter, Bella," he yelled. "Have a seat, please." Mr. Blackwood, a tall guy in his 60s, with kind eyes that seemed to be assessing something at all times. He looked up at me after rearranging some papers on his desk. "You did a great job here," he said, "but we have to talk about something. A college degree in hospitality administration or a similar discipline is usually required for front office manager positions." My heart fell. It was right here. At last, they had recognized my lack of qualifications for the position. "It's probably time for you to start college. Bella, Bewildered, I blinked. I apologize. The hotel will accommodate your timetable. Naturally, we want you to continue working here while earning your degree. My head was whirling. I had not anticipated this at all. I stumbled. I don't know what to say. Thank you. However, why? Grinning, he opened his desk drawer. I don't usually listen to outside counsel when it comes to hiring choices, but in your instance, a close friend advised that I do. He slipped a business card across the desk after taking it out. Call this number if you want to know why your career has just taken such an exciting turn. My breath caught as I took up the card. Mr. Richardson had given me the same number months prior. I sat in my apartment that night and looked at the card for an hour before I picked up my phone. I phoned with trembling hands. I wanted to know when you would call. The second ring was answered by that same voice. Do you and Mr. Blackwood have a friendship? I was able to inquire. James laughed. We've been friends for 30 years. He has faith in my ability to recognize talent. Therefore, each of these promotions was obtained. He made a deep cut. I only advised him to consider your potential. You did everything you accomplished on your own initiative. That night, we spoke for hours on end. He described how he had observed my work while he was there and was struck by my attention to detail and innate leadership skills. Something about me reminded him of himself in his younger years. That determination to succeed in spite of all obstacles. He had invited me to the same restaurant 2 months prior, and we went there for dinner 2 days later. I said yes this time. The next week I started college and declared hotel and restaurant management as my major. James was there for me at every turn, helps me study practically as well as emotionally. Describing his experience in business, teaching me stuff I couldn't learn from a textbook. Our bond grew organically. There was no dramatic moment when everything changed, no romantic gesture of grandeur. We just got closer every day until it felt as natural as breathing to be together. He said to move in with him. One evening, 6 months after that first phone contact, we were sitting on his penthouse balcony, looking out over the city lights. A month later, we were married in a short but exquisite ceremony, and I moved from my little studio into his opulent penthouse apartment. Girl, you hit the jackpot, my buddy Sarah screamed over coffee one afternoon. Successful, gorgeous, and truly pleasant. Those types of men aren't meant to exist. I chuckled, but she wasn't incorrect. James was all I could have wished for in a marriage. He encouraged my schooling, acknowledged my work successes, and made me feel appreciated, something I'd never experienced growing up. Family get-togethers were, to put it mildly, interesting because of my newfound contentment. It was difficult for Katie, who had always been the center of attention, to hold a man's attention for longer than a few weeks. She was having a successful job at the bank. Although she had achieved the position of assistant manager, her personal life was in disarray. During holiday feasts, I would find Grandma looking at James and me. Envy, scarcely disguised, flooded her gaze. Previously ignoring me until she needed something, the same sister now couldn't stop observing my every action. Did you notice that Katie spent the whole Christmas dinner staring at your ring? Later, James asked me. I was afraid she was going to use her eyes to pierce it. Having the finest of everything has always been a habit of hers. I let out a sigh. She doesn't seem to know how to cope with no longer being the focus of attention. When my parents began their effort to get Katie married off, things became much more difficult. At every family get-together, Mom would corner me. When she needed something, she would say, "Sweetheart," in that sugary way. James must have some good buddies, surely, ones that are alone. You know, Katie isn't getting any younger. Dad was blunter. James is the kind of accomplished person your sister deserves. You ought to assist her. Family is what it is. I didn't miss the irony. My favorite daughter's parents, who were unable to get funding for my schooling, were now attempting to take advantage of my connections. James must have a large network of qualified business people. At Easter dinner, Katie herself cornered me in the kitchen and said, "One day, why haven't you shown any of them to me?" I actually gave my sister my whole attention. Her flawless golden hair remained, but I had never seen such a desperate edge in her eyes. Perhaps it's because I don't want to be in charge of other people's romantic lives. I gave a thoughtful response. Furthermore, meeting a wealthy person isn't the only goal of partnerships. Katie. She yelled, "Easy for you to say. You have the wealthy hubby already." I knew I had made the proper decision to keep my distance as I left that conversation. I was uneasy with Katie's approach to finding a rich man for some reason. She seemed to be searching for a reward rather than seeking affection. I believed that I had at last discovered my happily ever after. On the surface, it appeared like I was correct during the following 2 years. But things started to alter gradually, almost subtly at first. Little things were the first. James started arriving home from work later and later. His work excursions, which used to be sporadic, became more regular. At first, I made justifications for him in my thoughts. He was busy. He was needed by the firm. This was only a short-term stage. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. A board meeting in emergency." He would text if he didn't have supper. I got ready. He would hardly glance up from his phone as he said, "This trip might take 2 weeks instead of 1. The more days went by, the more empty our house felt. I spent a lot of time alone in our rooftop apartment, and the sound of my heels reverberated throughout. I finally determined one evening that enough was enough. Determining to have an honest discussion about what was happening to us, I waited for him to wake up. "We must speak, James." When he entered at 11 p.m., I remarked. He gave me a look I had never seen him make before. Chilly, remote, almost irritated. "Indeed we do." The incident that followed seemed to be from someone else's life rather than mine. He stated bluntly, as though he were talking about the weather, "I want a divorce. I no longer love you. To be honest, I don't think I ever did." It seemed as though someone had hit me in the gut. "What? If there's a problem, James, we can fix it. Nothing needs to be worked on. Bella, it's finished. My attorney will contact you." After then, everything happened at warp speed. I received divorce papers within a few days. I had no claim to anything because of the prenuptial agreement I had signed, which I had assumed was only a formality, nor his money, nor the apartment, not even the furnishings we selected in a fog. With nowhere else to go, I crammed my personal belongings and clothes into 3 bags. I gave my parents a call. "I have to spend some time with you, Mom and Dad. Until I figure things out," I answered, trying not to crack my voice. I should have understood everything from the stillness on the other end. "Oh, sweetheart." There was a hint of fake pity in Mom's words. "We are currently undergoing renovations. The guest room is in utter disarray. I proposed to sleep on the couch. Dad, you see, jumped right in. The living room is also being painted. You are also aware of this house's tiny size." Each of their justifications was more obvious than the one before it. The barely disguised joy in their tones was the most painful thing. In fact, they were pleased that I had fallen from favor. I attempted to immerse myself in my job after finding a little flat across town. But all of a sudden, nothing was happening there either. All of my reports were returned with revisions. Every choice I made was scrutinized. At last, I was summoned to Mr. Blackwood's office. The man who had supported my career was now unable to look me in the eye. He shuffled papers on his desk and murmured, "Bella, you might be better off thinking about alternative options. We are pleased to offer a reference. After losing everything for a month, depression struck me hard. I hardly got out of bed. My family's silence was deafening. Not even an SMS to see if I was still alive, not even a call. Sarah is a blessing. Rise." One morning, she stormed into my flat with bagels and coffee and demanded, "I don't recognize this Bella. There was a life for the Bella you knew." I whispered to my pillow. "No." She pulled open my curtains. "I know a Bella who is a warrior, the person who began her career as a maid and rose to the position of manager, the one who worked a full-time job and attended college. Somewhere, is that Bella still there? Thank heavens." I had always handled money carefully. I had saved money on my own from years of working and living below my means, even with the prenuptial agreement. At least I had learned one valuable lesson from James: have a backup plan at all times. I stared at my ceiling one restless night. I was struck. I was well versed in the hotel industry. From running the front desk to cleaning the restrooms, I had done it all. I was aware of what worked, what didn't, and, above all, what the visitors truly want. "I intend to start my own hotel. The following morning at breakfast," I told Sarah. Her coffee almost suffocated her. It's ambitious. Although I have funds set out for launch expenses, I will require investors. My phone is already compiling lists, and I am certain of the type of hotel I want to build, I remarked. I started networking at a charity event for aspiring company owners, wrote a thorough business plan, and poured myself into my research. My idea for a boutique hotel that would blend luxury and individualized service was adored by 2 investors I met. It was a terrible first year. I filled in for every position when necessary, handled reception during the day, and completed paperwork at night. When my maid got the sick, I once had to take care of the house for 3 days. However, each tiresome time seemed different. I was constructing something for myself this time. The hotel started to make money gradually. Word got around about our meticulous attention to detail and individualized service. By the 3rd year, we were making money. By the 5th year, I had fully repaid my investors and owned the hotel. All this time, my family didn't say anything. It seemed as though I had never been, since they had so thoroughly shut me out of their lives. No more family get-togethers, no more Christmas invitations. It was painful at first, but I eventually came to see it as a blessing. Without them, there would be no more subtle put-downs, comparisons, or feelings that I wasn't good enough. Every now and again, I checked Katie's social media accounts. I suppose old habits die hard. I found out that she had finally found a wealthy man and had a child as a result. She frequently shared pictures of exotic holidays and high-end baby outfits on social media. She appeared to have everything she had ever desired. The 2 years went by in a blur. In addition to its success, the hotel had established itself as the city's preferred lodging option for tourists looking for opulence with a unique flair. Travel bloggers frequently highlighted us in their posts, complimenting our distinctive style of hospitality. We ought to take some action to support the community. One morning, I shared something bank with my management team. That's how our first charity gala came to be. We gathered local celebrities, business executives, and the media, and we turned the hotel's magnificent ballroom into a sparkling paradise. The purpose of the event was to gather funds for educational scholarships for youngsters from disadvantaged backgrounds. Adapting. Considering my personal educational background, it was a huge success, the gala. It was shown on local television channels. Online news outlets published articles on the hotel's owner's journey from poverty to wealth. And all of a sudden, I was in the news. My front desk manager gave my office a call 3 days later. "Your parents are in the lobby, Miss Bennett. They're very determined to see you. They swear they won't leave until you come down." I took a deep breath, fixed my suit jacket, and proceeded to the lobby. There they were, Mom and Dad, looking older, but just as entitled as ever. "Bella." Mom moved forward for an embrace I cleverly evaded. "Why are you here?" I asked coldly. "Are parents unable to wish to get back in touch with their daughter?" Dad made an effort to sound offended. "We have witnessed your achievement. We're really pleased. Feeling proud?" I gave a sour laugh. "When I needed a place to stay following my divorce, you weren't proud. For the 7 years you didn't bother to call, you were proud. It's water under the bridge." Mom waved her hand dismissively. "Family should keep together in terrible times. Speaking of which," her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper, "Katie's going through such a terrible phase. Her lover left her, and now she's all alone with the baby. He won't pay any child support. You could certainly assist your sister. It may have been morbid curiosity, or simply a need for closure. But I had to beg for something. What specifically do you want me to do to assist Katie?" Mom's eyes brightened, as if she had discovered a gap. "You may speak with the father of her child. Help him comprehend. He must provide for his child." I couldn't contain my laughter. Why would this man pay attention to me? He's not even someone I know. "Bella, don't be evasive." Dad lost his temper. "You know James, of course. After all, he was your spouse." The globe momentarily ceased to revolve. Abruptly, with nauseating clarity, the puzzle pieces fell into place. My parents spoke distantly about my sister's enigmatic wealthy guy. The moment my career fell apart. "James, Katie, and James," I muttered. "Well," Mom remarked defensively, "it's not like it was planned. These things simply occur. These things simply occur." I raised my voice. My sister and my spouse. And you were aware. You knew all this time. Katie and James fell in love. As if that clarified anything, Dad remarked. We couldn't really choose a side. Unable to choose a side. I was on the verge of yelling. Right now, you definitely choose a side. You removed me from your life. When I had nowhere to go, you refused to assist me. You now dare to come here and seek for my assistance. Be less theatrical. Mom sighed. For the best, everything turned out. Take a look at yourself. You now own a hotel of your own. Thus, James made the correct decision. Being let go from your previous position. Katie believed that having you work there would be too embarrassing. I gazed at my folks. I was meant to be loved and protected by these folks who had reared me. I noticed them clearly for the first time in that moment, as eager collaborators in ruining my life, not as the parents who had preferred Katie. Leave now. Silently, I said. Bella, now. Mom got things started. Leave now. I let out a yell. Safety. Immediately, 2 of my security guys showed up. The premises are off limits to certain individuals. My voice trembled with anger as I informed them. Under no circumstances will they be permitted to return to this hotel. Take them out with you. The guards were already guiding them to the door when you ungrateful little dad started. You'll regret this, Mom yelled. You just have your family. No, I called out to them. The purpose of family is to love, support, and shield you. You're not related. You are merely people who happen to be my parents. I didn't communicate with my parents via social media or mutual friends after that. I've heard glimpses of what transpired following the catastrophic breakdown of Katie and James's relationship. He threatens to sue her for slander, and she uses social media to vent about him every day, calling him every possible term in the book. My parents had to reduce their home after losing the majority of their retirement funds in a poor investment. My life has taken a fantastic turn in the interim. I met Michael at a convention for the hospitality sector 6 months ago. In addition to being nice and accomplished in his own right, he loves me for who I am, rather than what I can offer. Next spring, we will tie the knot. I occasionally look through Katie's irate social media messages late at night about James viewing their filthy laundry and posting it publicly. The cosmic justice of it all makes me chuckle. My sister, who believed she had gained everything by robbing my husband, now shares heartbreaking tales of her life as a single mother on social media every day. James, who believed he had been promoted to the better sister, is seeing his image tarnished. Additionally, they believed they had damaged my sister, myself. I'm doing well. Next year, my hotel will open a second site. Michael and I are planning our future together. And most importantly, and finally, free from the poisonous family that never actually loved me. Getting even isn't always the greatest form of retaliation. It involves leading a comfortable life and seeing karma in action from a safe distance, ideally while sipping champagne.